Are we so focused on what's happening in Syria that we're taking our eyes off of the serious stuff here at home? Like the fact that the number of U.S. households receiving food stamps just hit another record high. And this comes despite an unemployment rate that keeps falling, something the administration uses to say things are getting better. Well, if that's the case, shouldn't fewer people need food stamps? It's the reason why someone here is making the case we're becoming a nation too dependent on government. Hi, everybody. I'm David Asman. Welcome to Forbes on Fox. Let's go in focus with John Tamny, Rick Unger, Rich Karlgaard, Elizabeth McDonald, Sabrina Schaefer, and Bill Baldwin. We got a full house here today. Rich, are we all becoming, as a nation, too dependent on welfare?
Yeah, and this is a national tragedy for blue-collar employees. It's just absolutely horrible. And I think the core problem is that we have a tax and regulatory structure that punishes employers that hire blue-collar labor. So take an example in California. The largest employer in California is Chevron. It gets taxed at a federal and state combined rate of almost 44%. Meanwhile, about 30 miles away in Silicon Valley, Google and Apple, which have very few blue-collar laborers, Google is taxed at about a 10% combined federal and state rate, and Apple about 15%. So there's this huge disparity right now that's it's great if you're a white-collar skilled labor in this economy. It's just horrible if you're a blue-collar labor. And I don't think the federal government realizes how it's punishing these kinds of companies.
But, Rick, the fact is, just before we started this program, you and I were talking about how we were poor at one point in our career. We never would have thought about going on food stamps or any kind of welfare. Now we know middle-class kids who are doing it.
Well, but I think, the real answer to this question lies in the question that was asked. Yes, more people are going back to work, and yes, food stamps are at an all-time high. What does that tell you?
Isn't there something wrong with that picture?
No, it gives you the answer to the question, and that is people are going back to work in jobs that do not pay them enough money, and so they continue to qualify for food stamps. Somebody's laughing out there, but I got to tell you something. A guy that's working 40 hours a week and is not making enough money to support his family and needs food stamps, I don't find anything even the tiniest.
No, but Emac, the fact is that people like Rick and I used to eschew any idea of government assistance, even when we were making far below the qualifying amount that you need to now get into some kind of welfare program.
I know, and you and I used to talk about how we used to do the S&H green stamps, right, on Saturday mornings with our father, and our mothers. I mean, listen, I do worry. I think the poor want a job. They don't want welfare. I mean, give them a job, and that's the problem.
I hope you're right.
And the problem is the U.S. economy is still in the protective custody of the Obama administration. They did the exact wrong thing at the worst time, meaning the recession of this in the U.S., and that is enact two gigantic new bureaucracies that are basically putting a lot on top of companies, meaning health care and also financial services reform and a bunch of other reform. So the problem also, too, David, is the stigma, though, is kind of getting lost on using food stamps, and that's kind of scary as well.
And John Tamny, I hope Emac is right, that people still would prefer a job. But there's a question. By the way, I just filled out a form this morning from the benefit department of the New York City government, and I said I was a single guy making $10 an hour, which is essentially what we start out. Am I eligible for anything? I got this whole long list of what I'm eligible for in terms of welfare. I mean, I'm wondering whether we're reaching the point where it makes more sense not to work and just rely on government welfare.
I don't think so. I'm still very much an optimist. I look at the Reagan years, I look at the Clinton years, and what it tells me is that Americans love prosperity, and they're much happier when they're working, when they have opportunities. I think what these times show us is that government is very expert at wrecking an economy through spending increases, overtaxing us, over-regulating us through things like Obamacare that make it impossible to hire, dollar devaluation. They know how to create poverty, which puts people on the margin, on the government dole, but these people are not happy. They were much happier when the economy was growing in the Reagan and Clinton years.
But Bill, the fact is that even as unemployment begins to go down, I know it's going down because a lot of people are pulling out of the labor force. That's no good. But the Obama administration is taking credit for it, saying this is because things are getting better. Well, if so, why are more people on food stamps?
Well, there's no question the Obama economy has created great growth in the number of people collecting disability, food stamps, and unemployment for more than a year. But the dilemma is how to be compassionate without warping incentives. And I think there's an answer. I think that prosperous people, like everybody on this set, should be dipping into their pockets a little deeper, and welfare allotments should be actually greater. However, I think the work requirements for all of these programs should be much greater. And right now, the Obama administration is moving in the other direction. They're trying to weaken work requirements. So it is a little too easy not to apply
and Sabrina,
for a job.
to Bill's point, there are states that are trying to do that. In fact, in Ohio, Governor John Kasich in Ohio has actually said that people need to start, able-bodied people that are now receiving food stamps, single people, need to work for those food stamps. Do you think on a state level, anyway, that may gain some traction?
I absolutely do, and this is why. Since 2007, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, or SNAP, has tripled in size. We now spend $70 billion a year helping support more than 47 million Americans. That's 1 out of every 7 Americans to be on food stamps. That's a very bleak picture. And the larger question, as Bill suggested, is how do we help these people? How do we make sure that Americans have the basics in terms of food and shelter and clothing? And I think as government steps in and makes us a country of dependent people, it crowds out civic society. It crowds out churches and synagogues and schools and neighborhoods who traditionally are much better equipped to help those in their communities who are in need.
And Rich, the fact is, the bigger the welfare system becomes, the bigger the food stamp rolls become, the more fraud there is. The fraud has just ticked up about 30% in the food stamp program.
Yeah, it becomes a self-perpetuating monster. But I would go back to the root problem here. Where are high-paying blue-collar jobs that are missing in this economy? You find them in energy production, you find them in transportation and shipping, you find them in manufacturing. I'm not saying these industries should be subsidized. I'm saying they should be unshackled so they, are under the same regulatory umbrella and tax structure that companies like Google and Apple and Wall Street is. These companies that provide the blue-collar jobs are the most taxed and regulated industries in the United States. Is it any wonder the jobs have disappeared?
But Rick, the fact is sticking on food stamps for a second, when we talk about the expanding roles, we're also talking about expanding fraud. We just had a case in Arizona, by the way, where people were using their food stamp cards as sort of like a credit card for trips to Hawaii.
Yeah, it's been happening for years. Look, I am actually...
But it's ticking up now.
It is. I'm with you all the way when it comes to fraud. I wish we would spend as much time debating how to end the fraud as we seem to spend on what I think is a false argument.
What we did during the Clinton administration, we totally reformed welfare as a result of it. This president won't reach to the Republicans to do that.
It may have more to do with the timing. Look, people are going back to work. People are going back to work. They're not being paid enough money to survive without it. This may not be the time.
I get it, but listen. Yeah, I hear what you're saying. Rick Carlgard has it dead on, and that is that we have this flat tire of a U.S. economy where the U.S. government is throwing banana peels in the form of more rules or barbed wire taxes at these companies that can create jobs. And listen, the problem is, David, the extraordinary is now ordinary, and that is the use of government welfare. We want to help the poor, get them a job.
Yep. And I think we'd all agree that we are a better community, a better country when folks don't want to take welfare. That's the problem, is the spirit of America, I think, is being destroyed.